I'd like to come back to what I was discussing before about how important it is for us to develop appropriate solutions for women's housing, in the fact that we need the voices from people with the most expertise, people who have experienced the system firsthand, who understand the drivers and impacts of homelessness, and who know what works and what doesn't. Our next panel is led by people with lived experience of homelessness through their own journeys and also through supporting others who are at risk. We will be led today by Kate Colvin, who is a Policy Director for Council to Homeless Persons and also the lead to the Everybody Home campaign. She will provide a quick presentation and facilitate the panel. Our panel today will be made up of the amazing Kathy Oddie, who has lived experience of domestic and family violence, which resulted in experiencing housing insecurity. She now works with victim survivors of family violence and sees firsthand the continuing issues that the lack of appropriate housing causes. She has been a survivor advocate for Safe Steps since 2007 and was appointed to the Victorian Department of Justice and Community Safety's Victim of Crime Consultative Committee as a victim representative. Kathy is passionately committed to the healing, recovery and financial well-being of victim survivors of domestic and family violence. Yi Man Louie has also experienced domestic and family violence, living in refuge with her 2 young children and navigating the private rental and government systems to secure housing. Yi Man is also a survivor advocate for Safe Steps. Since leaving her abusive relationship, Yi Man has been awarded a PhD from RMIT University, investigating the emergent issues of technology-facilitated abuse with a specific focus on victim survivors from culturally diverse backgrounds. We also have the wonderful Yara, who lives with multiple disabilities and is a survivor of family violence and childhood abuse. She has studied drugs and alcohol and mental health. Yara works in lived experience in homelessness, drugs and alcohol, mental health and family violence. She's a member of Weavers, who are a panel of survivors of violence against women. Yara works with the Experts by Experience project and has a background in lived experience and community-based research. Her passions include animals, art, music, disability pride, queer pride, the ocean, swimming and creative writing. Yara has written a poem about what respect is for her for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and International Day for People with a Disability. Yara's lyrics, Reclaiming My Story, Reclaiming My Life, were included in the Safe Steps Candlelight Vigil on the 5th of May 2021. The vigil remembers women and children who have died as a result of family and domestic violence. Yara was a finalist of the 2021 Victoria Disability Awards in the Excellence in Promoting Rights, Fairness and Safety category. So I'd like to welcome Kate Colvin first, who will be speaking to us and then facilitating the panel, and if all the amazing, incredible, courageous panel members could join us as well. Please welcome them.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a few comments and then I'll sit down and we'll have a conversation because what I want to do is explore what is happening in the rental market and what's happening in social housing, but then really examine what that means in terms of how people experience that, and then also we'll talk through what would be a more ideal outcome, what needs to happen, what's the sort of perfect solution. But before I get going, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri country and pay respect to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people in the room today. So, just have to work out how to navigate the... Oh, good. Thank you. Please go forward. Oh, thank you. So I just, this sort of springboards off what Angela was saying about the housing market. I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing market. I thought Angela would actually talk about the Nowhere to Go report, which is a piece of work that she did for Everybody's Home. So I was imagining I was bouncing off that, but that was really, I loved what Angela was saying. It's really interesting to sort of think back to those capabilities. But basically, I guess, many of you will have experienced a tough time in the rental market or be working with people who are really struggling in the rental market. And I guess what I wanted to show with this chart is that what people are experiencing, of course, is very real, because what's happened over the past decade is that rents, particularly at the cheaper end of the rental market, have increased much faster than people's wages. So obviously this picture finishes in 2017, and you can see that what the dots are showing is that that's the rents that are paid by low-income households. So they've increased faster than rents overall. And since 2017, rents have increased. That pattern has escalated even further. So it's really tough out there in the private rental market in terms of affordability. Another thing which has happened in the past, just really the past, not much more than a year, is that we also have much lower vacancy rates than we would ordinarily have. So we generally consider a vacancy rate around 2 or 3% to be a balanced market where you've got about the same amount of renters as you have rental properties that are available. At the moment, right across the country, we're at 1.2%, and in some markets, particularly in regional Victoria, in other regional areas around the country, it's well below 1%. And so that means you might have 20 or 30 households turning up to rent a single property, and a lot more households turning up to rent the cheapest properties in the market than there are turning up to rent the most expensive ones. And that then pushes up price, but it also allows for discrimination. And so, of course, if there's 20 white families, trying to get that property, and 3 Aboriginal families, I think history can show us what the real estate agent's decision will be in that context. It makes it much harder for single parents if they're competing against perhaps a professional couple who don't have kids. There's all of those discriminatory elements around age, around disability that play into it as well and make it really hard, even on an equivalent income, for anyone who's facing discrimination to get a rental. So this just shows that before the pandemic, 40% of people who are on Commonwealth rent assistance were in rental stress. Now that's up to almost 46%. Of course, just in terms of thinking about policy solutions, when people had double coronavirus supplement, that was way down to 29%. So, giving people, it's really rocket science, isn't it? Giving people more money so they can afford the rent makes them more able to afford the rent. Amazing. So this shows you, this is what we're fighting against. So this is sort of the nuts and bolts of the money that's in the federal budget for social and Indigenous housing. And you can see the blue line is the mainstream social housing and homelessness money, and the pink line is Indigenous housing. So most of the drop in funding has been in Indigenous housing, but the mainstream social housing, while it's kind of stayed flat, it hasn't decreased, but over that period, population has increased massively. So it's decreased per capita. And that is really the underlying reason why we have less social housing as a proportion of the total population than we used to, and that's why it's harder to get into social housing. So just quickly, the shortfall of social housing in Victoria is 102,800 properties. We recently had the big housing build investment in 9,000 social housing properties, another 3,000 affordable. So you can see, and then the total, 433,000, and the federal government just committed to building 30,000 properties over 5 years, over 8 states and territories. It's a good investment. It's better than poking the eye with a burnt stick, but it's not the scale of investment that's needed. So that essentially is what we're up against, is trying to change that whole scenario so that we've got more affordability in the private rental market, more money into social housing so that we have more social housing. And I think Yes, so I did just want to talk particularly about Victoria and a set of data. So, obviously we had the Royal Commission into Family Violence, I think reported in 2015. People in the room will remember that better than me. I think it was 2015. And made a big commitment to housing, and also committed to report every year on whether or not the housing need of women and children fleeing family violence was being met. Now, the first report came out, and this is where you can find it. I always love new data. It's really how we can hold government to account. So this is really, it's like all these Excel spreadsheets that made me very happy, except that the result of what's in the data doesn't make me happy. So what we can see here is that the number of households whose needs are being met for long-term housing has pretty much stayed the same over that period of 6 years. The numbers who are not having their housing needs met is growing and growing. So we had a massive Royal Commission, had all that energy, there was a housing commitment, but it wasn't enough to meet need, and the consequence is that then women are fleeing violence into homelessness, which is what we're going to talk about now. So that's it from me, and I'm going to sit down and then we'll talk.
Hello.
Okay. So, I guess maybe if we go around in turn, I'd be really interested to sort of start by understanding, perhaps starting with you, Kathy, what your experience of stepping into the housing market after fleeing violence was, in terms of whether or not you were able to get housing, and then if you interacted with homeless services, what that experience was like for you.
Thank you, Kate. So I guess what I'd like to start off by saying is that my experience of housing in my 2 long-term abusive relationships was that I was the person who was on the lease. And in terms of actually experiencing homelessness, that's not part of my story. However, I definitely had major issues maintaining my tenancies. However, as part of my story, I have supported my mother in periods of where she's experienced homelessness directly as a result of family violence. So whilst I was going through my own family violence experience, I was also supporting her through hers. And as a third factor to that, through a lot of that period of time, I was working at Centrelink and helping people out in that capacity. And most recently, my role is with Strait in the Western region, and I'd like to acknowledge both Michaela and Nikki for the amazing work they're doing in refuge and crisis and our case management team. So when I look at my experience of both the earlier abusive relationship in my 20s and then the second one in my 30s, that I was the one who already had that housing stability put in place, and it was actually my perpetrators who put that at risk. That both of my perpetrators subjected me to every type of abuse, and in terms of the actual properties, so much damage was caused, and I had to be the person who bore the brunt of having that damage fixed. So an example of that being moving on from the first location where I lived with the perpetrator, and ultimately I would have wanted to have left that a lot earlier, but my experience of seeking help on a year into the relationship and abuse was being held hostage at gunpoint and contacting 000 for the first time. And rather than holding the perpetrator accountable, they took me out of the house and they dumped me at Southern Cross Station. I wasn't given any referrals for support. I wasn't taken to the hospital for my injuries. And I wasn't at a point where I was ready to talk to my family about what I was going through, because I was finding it really hard to articulate. So I actually just got straight back on the train and went back to the house, because in my mind I was thinking, I'm the one on the lease. The majority of all the items in the house belong to me and have been provided to me by my family. How am I going to explain to them if this is all destroyed. I wasn't in a right state of mind to even consider that at that moment. And because that's what I did, it was my birthday present on return back to that house was being beaten up until I was strangled unconscious, till I was at the point of unconsciousness, and never feeling through the remainder of that relationship like I could call the police again, because he used that as a form of emotional abuse to say, what will happen if you call the police? Oh, that's right, nothing. They didn't do anything when they came last time. So yeah, go ahead and call the police. So subsequently we moved into a different home, and his present to me on the very first night we got the keys was to actually put me through the plaster of the hallway entrance. And so, second day of being in that property, I'm actually having to arrange for that to be fixed, and I'm the one having to pay for that. Jump forward to second relationship, 6.5 years of having to deal with all the abuse that I went through with that perpetrator, all the damage he caused, all the times I had to get that fixed. And when he walked out, eventually, I discovered I was pregnant. He'd left me over 70,000 in debt. To discover I was pregnant, to discover that all these things that were much worse financially than I even first imagined, discovering all this sort of stuff, the stress that it caused led to me actually losing my baby. And at that time, I was working full time. However, when you go from having a house where you're having 2 people meeting the cost to then having to bear all of that in debt repayments, I, for the first time in my life, was actually looking up with all seriousness escort sites and how to become an escort. And this is nothing in any way of anything against people who choose to go into the sex industry, but at that moment in my life, that did not feel like much of a choice. And thankfully, to another amazing Safe Steps advocate who also sat at the time as the chair of the Committee of Management on Project Respect, she talked me through what I was going through and steered me in a different direction, and actually gave me a role on the board of Project Respect to actually give me a whole other pathway. But I can tell you that second relationship ended in 2016, and just because, as everyone knows here, just because the violence and abuse ends doesn't mean that the trauma and hardship ends. So I've been, right up until about 2 months ago, I've been paying off that debt. And as recently as this time last year, I couldn't afford to buy tampons. So right from 2016 through to now, the impact of the abuse and the violence has been for me that I've had to make those choices of, do I keep a roof over my head and pay my rent? Do I pay the debt repayments so that I don't end up in an even worse situation? Or do I put food in my cupboards? And often it's the food in the cupboards and the other things that come secondary to maintaining the roof over your head. So now that I'm doing the work that I do with Berry Street, assisting people in our after hours crisis response space, I'm seeing this. My story is not unique. This is what so many people who have experienced family violence are going through every single day of the week, and often with many less resources than what I have. And so what I would say is that what we need to really focus on is actually making sure that we're not seeing this as a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to actually provide different options that are suitable for the different needs that people have.
That really sort of brings forward for me the many ways in which people's financial security then impacts on housing stability and of course the ways in which violence can involve compromising that financial stability as well, and clearly for so many years. So it's good to hear that that didn't become homelessness, but I can hear how close that came to that experience. Yeah. I'll pass over to Yiman now for really the sort of same question about whether your journey into the housing market after fleeing violence.
Okay.
and into homeless services.
All right,
as well.
my heart is still pounding with the children. Like, you know, as a survivor, you kind of hear like stories, and like each individual story is different. To me, my story is I'm a migrant. I came to the country, and with my perpetrator, we have 2 children. He's an Australian, but as a migrant, I have lack of knowledge of what my rights are, and basically lack of knowledge of what my relationship was, until that fateful night that he tried to strangle me. And one thing led to the other. I contact a local community health service and asking for a marriage counselor, and they said that you don't need a marriage counselor, your life is in danger, your children's life is in danger, you need to come in. So the pin dropped, and in the haste, so I just packed something, a suitcase between 3 of us, and like walked to the train station, before worry about like being found out that we left the house, and got there, had no idea what's going on, and so the workers tried to organize us to go into a safe place. That's when I found out that there's a place called Refuge. And I waited in the center for nearly the whole day. It's getting dark, and I still don't know what's going on. The kids were, I got a 4-year-old and also a 6-month-old baby at the time. And my son kept asking, when are we going home? When are we going to go to see daddy? And I'm not functioning at all. I just cannot stop crying, and was in such a state. And basically, it kind of like, I wasn't making a decision as such. I just thought like going with the flow of what is being offered. Like, you know, you need to go into this place. So eventually we got picked up and then went to the Refuge. And my understanding was the Refuge was supposed to be a crisis short-term accommodation, but because like many migrant women, my family is overseas, far away. I don't have any network here. I don't have any friends that I can call. And all our friends are his friends, his family, which is making it very difficult to like seek help. If I contact them, obviously he'll find out. And yeah, so I stayed there. I think I got told that I broke a record of staying there because like it was a great difficulty for me to find rental accommodation, because being a single mom with 2 young children, you can imagine, and being a stay-at-home mom, I don't have any income, I don't have any like work employment history, nothing. And even though like every weekend I'll go out, you know, talk to kids, you know, catch a train and go to the places to, so I fill in the application, and many of those are not going anywhere. And I was quite desperate because I was thinking like, that's it, like I'm not gonna have anywhere to go to. It did cross my mind that if I got nowhere to go, I can't stay in this you know, temporary accommodation. And the guilt and the self-blame of what I put my children through starts sort of kicking, and it crossed my mind that maybe I will kill myself in front of the doorstep, then leave the children there. He will be happy because I will no longer be the cause of the problem. But thankfully, because in the Refuge, I got that starting to, it's like a chain reaction. So I learned about what TV was about, I learned about the options, I learned about what my rights are, that I'm not going to be deported because you know, I got my rights to be an Australian resident and later become a citizen. And yeah, for my children, because I did not know that because my 4-year-old son already started to pick up some manipulative behaviors, so he has a behavioral issue as well. And to be honest, he wet his bed continuously for a whole week. And just show you that children, I talk about the child lens, like, is so important. And yes, that he also gone through trauma. I don't know about my 6-month-old baby because she never knew about what happened. But I could tell you, like, she cried a lot, you know, was breastfeeding. I suppose it's stress that passed on, like, yeah. So in that sense, I'm glad that I seek help, but it was just a by chance, like a potluck, that I came across a worker who told me that you don't need a marriage counselor, you need to come in, you need to treat this situation. And yeah, so I've seen that there are lots of helps out there, but it is like whether you know about it, whether you know how to like work the system, so to speak, because like for me, English is not my first language, so at the time they got me linked up with external agency with bilingual, bicultural worker, and also linked me up with counselor, linked me up with legal aid, helped me with the intervention order, police, the magistrate court, you know. I would love to see more like explaining, because I have to learn. I love learning, that's why I got a PhD. You know, I'm not for like investigating. So I have to spend a lot of time when the kids are sick, like look up like all the, you know, information, you know, what do I do when I go to the magistrate court, you know? Like how does the family, like, you know, I need to fight this court case of the custody, you know, he wants the kids because I'm, you know, in his mind or in his affidavit, I'm crazy. You know, I try to strangle the kid because I'm not coping with my family overseas, and he's a professional, he got a 4-bedroom house, I'm nothing, you know, I have nowhere to go, and so on and so forth. So I would love to see, not just like have a roof over my head, but that continuous like support, regardless whether I'm linked into a service or not. So that would be a great, like it's not like a location based or like fixed to like if you're linked into agency, then there's a help, but if you're not, like when I move out, finally found my wonderful, you know, unit, I couldn't believe my luck after 3 months staying from crisis to leaving. So that gave me a hope, like when I walk into this empty 2-bedroom unit, first time I feel like what a relief, like a show, like it kind of like a truck was waiting on me, and finally I can see a glimpse of hope of rebuilding myself and my kids' life, and because I need to be strong. So I suppose if it's not because of my children, I don't think I'll be here talking to you, because I have to live for them. And if it's not because of the workers that helped me, that the refuge that gave me that breathing space to sort of like slowly come to terms with what has been happening for more than 9 years in my life, that brainwashing, that, you know, self-doubt, I wouldn't think that I'll have the courage or I have that strength to pull through. Yes, so does it answer the question?
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Was the unit a private rental or was it social housing?
Private rental, because of the social housing, the workers try to the worker at the time tried to help me, to show me the options, like, you know, you could be going into like applying social housing, but when I hear about the waiting list, and I said, what, how many years? Like, I just cannot wait. Like, you know, and on top of it, I got nowhere else to go. And it's interesting, like later on, I did a research into couch surfing and youth homelessness. And I suppose if I got family and friends here, I might have actually taken down that path of not disclosing, but I said, hey, can I come to stay in your place for just a few nights here and there and disguise it? Like before, yeah, so it is great. It's kind of like an option, but for me, I don't have that option. Like when I interview the workers, they say that couch surfing often being used as a stopgap. It's better end up in the street. So if you got somewhere else to go, maybe that's an option. But actually it's not an option, as we know, isn't it? Like, so yeah. So yeah, it's a long waiting list. And the private rental is like, as I said, like it's a very competitive. You know, actually recently an agent called me and talked about. I live in the Mornington Peninsula area. The vacancy rate is 0.9% at the moment, and I know someone who told me that she's from Braveheart. She said, "Oh yeah, we took 80 groups of people around a couple of weeks ago to see 10 rental property."
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it? Yeah. Can we pass to you now, Yara? Just tell us about. Oh, you've got a mic. Great.
Hi everyone.
Yeah, what your experience of moving into the housing market was.
Hi, I'm Yara. I'm from country Victoria, but I grew up all over the place and between states. I want to first acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, their traditional owners and traditional custodians and elders past, present and emerging. I do my work anonymously as a survivor advocate to protect myself because of my disabilities and also to protect my family with disabilities who I care for. I also facilitate a homeless women's and gender diverse peer support group for people with disabilities, deaf or hard of hearing, chronic illness and or mental illness. I wanted to pay my respects to all the survivors out there too, and the women in my support group who are on to the 10th, 11th or 12th surgeries from family violence, and the other survivors out there who are permanently disabled from family violence or live with permanent mental health issues from family violence. I grew up in the youth refuge system and the streets. The trauma I experienced in this system and the streets was even more traumatic than the childhood abuse and family violence I escaped in the first place. My lived experience housing advocate's role was for 3 months. She went the extra steps to help me. She created a table of all the 50 organisations and NRAS providers she and I had contacted to try to get me housed and their responses, and ended up writing a summary advocacy letter of the table to give back to DHHS and VHR to further advocate to them to house me, to show that no one else would house me and evidence their discrimination against my disability housing needs and major disability modification needs. I had email histories I forwarded her over the previous 2 or 3 years for me writing to all the Victorian housing organisations begging them to house me. To this day, this letter has been a powerful self-advocacy tool I keep using when pestering housing providers to house me and to show my side of the story and the truth. Her advocacy role was defunded, and I would like to see more lived experience housing advocate peer workers employed. My disability advocate advocated for extra privacy and security requirements I needed for my file to stay in hiding, and she tried to get me a housing worker and case manager, but there weren't enough for anyone to help me. The applying for an FSP was also helpful, but the process was way too long. Eventually, my advocate helped me get a safety device through disability funding at Safe Steps, which helped me the most to have more freedom of movement back because it links to a security company who call the police for you if you need them. I wish I knew about the safety device earlier. Good workers would ask me what I needed to engage with the service and do the best to help meet my needs. The things that didn't help was that I had other workers judging me for choosing to stay in the previous relationship I was in because they believed I should leave, but they didn't know the real levels of violence I was facing on the streets being a homeless and disabled young woman, or how dangerous it is for me to sleep rough with my asthma and autoimmune conditions and chronic infections, which was a contributing factor to why I entered the relationship in the first place to get off the streets. I experienced a lot of pedophiles and rapists stalking me and targeting me on the streets, men attempting to gang rape me, other men trying to force me into sex work. I had an organised crime gang come after me on the streets, abusing me and trying multiple times to abduct me in their vehicles. I had to flee Melbourne for over 2 years to get away from the gang, minimise how visible I was if I did visit Melbourne, and in this time I was still homeless and still kept almost dying from my complex medical conditions and lung disabilities while sleeping rough in the winter, because homelessness, the freezing cold and chronic sleep deprivation were making all my severe health issues severely worse. So this forced me deeper into the relationship I was in because I had nowhere else that was safe to go. And I couldn't even see my own family much at all for over 2 years because I was so scared that the gang or my ex would stalk me to see my family. I had been raped multiple times being homeless, and I caught HPV from being raped homeless. That almost led to cancer to kill me. I've now healed that, but I was scared I wouldn't heal it because I have 4 autoimmune conditions. Being born autoimmune, I didn't want to catch more things that would make my immune health suffer more. So having workers judge me for my choice to stay in a relationship that was protecting me from being gang raped on the streets homeless They had no idea what would happen to me if I left into homelessness. It was really degrading. I applied for thousands of rental properties across 2 years. I made police reports. I fought really hard to get out of my circumstances and keep myself and my family safe from the violence. I changed my entire identity, appearance and identity documents and stopped the hackings of my devices and accounts. Choosing between violence on the streets and violence in your home or being murdered after leaving a relationship is not a real choice. Going to 40 rental inspections a week long term, I had to drop out of my university course. I was referred on by organisations hundreds and hundreds of times, moving around to different areas because I had to keep moving to stay safe and not be stalked. It was really draining, and I'm at a point now where I don't engage much with the system at all. My workers wouldn't communicate in accessible ways, and I couldn't engage much as I kept almost dying from my health conditions. My workers' expectations of engagement were too high, and I just wasn't able to engage the majority of the time. I was in shock, depression, PTSD, dissociation, severe health issues, survival mode. With trying to find housing, many services would chuck me in the too hard basket because I had too many disability and medical housing requirements, and 99% of housing is not disability accessible in Victoria. It was just too hard for them trying to help me find housing, and many services wouldn't help me stay. They wouldn't help me because I don't stay in a fixed catchment area. So you need an address to be in a local government catchment area to be eligible to get help from a service, and the workers didn't have the amount of time or work involved in trying to find housing that was functionally survivable for my disability requirements. It made the job too hard. I can't live in areas my perpetrators live in, and all these issues, and that the housing ads don't advertise if the housing's accessible or not. So you actually have to go out there to inspect it to see if it's accessible or not. All these issues made it too hard to find housing, and there were the other workers using my mental health and childhood abuse against me who didn't believe my story, who thought I was mentally unwell, and I had to show them videos and other evidence I collected against the crimes against me to prove them wrong. Thank you.
Thanks, Yara. And I think that really highlights so many things, but certainly that experience of women choosing one bad man rather than life on the streets is incredibly common. And it's why, in terms of when we look at homelessness overall, it's so important to look at the many dimensions of homelessness to really capture what's happening for women, because very few women sleep on the streets for exactly those reasons. It's just so dangerous and the experiences are so traumatising. So thanks for sharing that. I wonder now if we should start sort of exploring some of the solutions, and I wonder if there might be, as you were saying, Kathy, like that, it's not a one size fits all, because I can see that in the stories coming out today that it's not quite as simple as just, needing social housing. There's a number of kind of things coming through. But maybe, Kathy, because you're also working in the sector, I wonder if you can share a bit about particularly what you think about ways to protect women's financial security when perpetrators are causing so much damage to your future financial well-being.
Thank you. So I guess what I'd like to reflect on too is working in a regional rural area, that there's particular challenges faced by women in the regional rural spaces that potentially are less of an issue for those in metropolitan settings. But we support a lot of women who don't have a driver's licence or access to vehicle. They're often on very isolated properties. Crisis doesn't tend to happen between 9 to 5. Could be convenient, but so we might be supporting women who are needing to leave with just themselves, their children, and very frequently a pet or pets in the middle of the night, have to drive maybe over an hour down dark bush tracks to get to where we might have found some accommodation for them. And so just look at this, that in a regional area, the amount of accommodation is limited. And then you look at the places that actively discriminate against your clients and won't take them, so then that cuts down the level of available accommodation. Then we have certain accommodation types that are specifically where perpetrators may be placed, so we wouldn't place victim survivors there. And then it's about, okay, so is this a situation where this is a client who's needed to access services multiple times and maybe the perpetrator knows this is a place that we might put them in and that's a place, so then that cuts down that list for that person even further. And if they can't leave without having their pet. So I'm thinking very much of an example of a woman with a child with a disability, and that pet was playing a role as an assistance animal. And whilst they probably could have gone, it would have made things so much more difficult if that pet hadn't gone with them, because it would have been the level of trauma increased for the child, and the child would have been very reluctant to leave. So then you look at, okay, how many places in a whole western region of Victoria will take pets? And then that cuts your list down to a very tiny amount of places. So when I'm looking at how we support our clients, it's not just about finding accommodation, it's about finding appropriate accommodation for that person and listening to what their needs are, what are their safety concerns. Do they need their fur baby with them? And this is really, really important because it can make all the difference between them staying away from a situation of abuse to not. And also looking at really, really functional needs. So for example, if you've got a mother with a baby who's, let's just for argument's sake, from a culturally and linguistically diverse background or Indigenous background, who has very limited supports in that local area, and let's just say, you know, this is a culturally and linguistically diverse example, no family in Australia, and they're not on any form of benefit. Their only source of income is doing some hospitality work, even with a very small child. They're placed in accommodation where there's not even the most basic of cooking facilities. And so for them, it's not an arrangement that can be sustainable. So they return to the perpetrator, not because they want to return to the relationship, but it's a return to housing which is suitable. And because they make that choice to return, child protection gets involved. They're supported to leave, and then they're punished for leaving. And it's not that this, in these sort of cases, which happen over and over again, that these mothers are bad mothers. They're amazing, resourceful, courageous mothers who are just needing to be given appropriate accommodation, not be facing having their child removed from them to cause additional trauma for them and for the child, and making it much, much harder for them to trust to work with services in the future. So when I look at what we have available in our area, like, you could triple it, just like you could here in metropolitan Melbourne, and it still wouldn't be enough. And the other thing too, and I'm looking at Nikki, our refuge worker here, is that it's not just when a refuge accommodation place suddenly becomes available that someone goes out immediately, someone can come in. Because there's a bit of a lag between needing to make sure that that property is in a condition that's actually safe for the next person to come in. So it's about treating clients with dignity and making sure that you're not placing them in somewhere that's maybe not up to the standard that you'd want if you moved into somewhere in a position of crisis. And just be aware too that most of the women and children we're placing in the after-hours space, they're leaving with nothing apart from the clothes on their back often. So we have an actual storeroom which has got, for example, for the children, buddy bags which are age appropriate. We've got hygiene packs ready to go with toiletries, and we've also got clothes. So that in that sort of moment at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it may be, if they don't have anything apart from what's on them, we can actually provide them some things that give them some dignity in that moment.
Thank you. That's a lot of really important solutions there. I'm just wondering, maybe jump back to Yara to explore this idea about the sort of various supports that you talked about that you've been connecting with. Certainly what we understand as best practice around working with people who've had that sort of set of experiences of homelessness multiple times is to have support teams that incorporate health workers alongside housing workers, alongside people that can help you connect to other supports that you might need in the community. But critically, what I was hearing in your story was that important element about housing choice, to make sure that the housing meets your needs. So I'm just wondering if you can reflect on whether or not that sounds like something that would work for you, or if you've had any experiences of interacting with housing homelessness programs that have potentially incorporated those elements, because from what I was hearing, it sounds as though you haven't had a good experience, you haven't sort of hit upon a service that's given you a good experience and got you into housing yet.
Yeah, like for me, my biggest barriers being the Victorian Housing Register is I need to stay off grid completely in hiding, and even changing your name, you're still searchable by your old name when you apply for that system. And they don't have any, like Centrelink have a restricted access system where there's extra encryption, it's password protected, and you can't be searched under the system to find any address information or identifying information. And I'm still trying to get the Victorian Housing Register to establish a restricted access system, so that way people who can't have their address listed on file for safety reasons can have the extra privacy protection they need. And this issue does affect many homeless women who are survivors who do want to stay off grid completely from the government because of the violence that they've escaped and not have any address on file. And there's also issues with the accessibility of refuges. There's not enough accessible refuges to meet the demand for population, which means that many disabled people are still being turned away from accessing refuges, and the length of stay isn't suitable for the criminal investigations, the children's court, all the child protection stuff can drag on for years, and their risk of being murdered is still extremely high. I would like to see refuge stays extended for the time that someone actually needs to be fully in hiding for. And there's no gender diverse refuge in Victoria or Australia-wide as far as I know, which is a huge issue for gender diverse people. And I'm happy to come back another time to present about the work that me and my homeless women's peer support group are doing. Most social and public housings are so dangerous and unsafe that it forces people to leave the housing they're given. There's the 80-20 model where there's 80% residents and 20% social and community housing tenants that Nightingale Housing and Women's Property Initiatives have invested in. That model's a lot safer because they only put 20% of the apartment complex as people on low income. So there's more sense of community, and they do things to mix with the residents as well. And there's many people who are too medically unwell to find housing. This has been my situation as well, and there's no extra support for them to find housing, and most aren't on the NDIS because NDIS doesn't help for medical illnesses or chronic illnesses. There's a fixing up, I would like to see fixing up of sheds, garages into self-contained granny flats as a transitional option. And also investing in tiny houses off-grid for those who have escaped violence, because there should be a way that people can leave. Also, there should be a way people can leave in their wills, their home or a lump sum to buy a home, to donate the housing to people in need. There was one house that's been donated through a church, which was arranged privately through the church and a woman in my homeless women's group. So when she passes away, that house will be donated to her and her children who have escaped violence. And there's a kid, which is a total miracle, and there's the Kids Undercover do tiny houses for those under 25 years, but there's no option for those over 25. there's accessible family violence, and I would like to see funding for accessible family violence and housing legal support that helps beyond just IVOs and helps if you're being discriminated against by housing services for your disability housing needs. Because NDIS won't fund home modifications, which forces the housing organisations to fund them, but most of them won't. There's an assumption that NDIS will house you, but they don't house you unless you have 24/7 care needs. If you're not eligible, then if you don't have 24/7 care needs, you're not eligible for specialist disability accommodation, even if you do have 20 major disability and medical modification needs. 99% of the still vacancies in NDIS are group homes, and you don't get to choose who you live with. You don't get your own place. You have to share with noisy disability workers and everyone else, and that often the disability workers abuse people in group homes. And these are really expensive places. Some of them are costing tens of thousands of dollars a week for people to be placed in these institutions who don't even want to live in an institution, and it's just wasting a lot of money for people to be abused. And doing the NRAS and community housing applications, it would have helped a lot for me to have someone to do them for me, because I'm too medically unwell to do the housing applications myself. There's some of the paperwork is like 50 to 60 pages long per NRAS application, and you need practical help to get to rental inspections. Safe Steps disability funding doesn't even cover that. And I couldn't physically get to a lot of rental inspections myself because of the limited mobility and fatigue. And help making my rental application stronger and finding a rental guarantor earlier would have helped me more. I think the catchment area issue in all services should be abandoned and be flexible so homeless people can be included in accessing services equally, and so that those who are unsafe in different areas, regional or wherever, can access a service in a different area. And I feel like there needs to be quotas in private rental on how many rental applications you can make, like for disadvantaged people to be force the agents and the landlords to accept us into private rentals. And this would ease the disability discrimination in the private rental market. I'm on to 10,000 rental applications later, and only 1 in 1,000 applications gets accepted, and often the ones that get accepted aren't survivable for my minimal functional needs or my medical requirements. And you can refer people to the NDIS Access Project with Lifeline to help them get on the NDIS, but 99% of the non-SCA vacancies in the NDIS, you don't get your own place. And because of my chronic illnesses, my infections, my immune compromised health issues, I'm trying to get my own place, and NDIS won't fund, I covered that. But just nutrition is a big issue because people are eating a lot of takeaway. The sleep deprivation drives people mad, and I would like to see sleep capsules in safe places where people can actually get some rest to sleep, and better nutrition for homeless people. And women get stalked and raped a lot at the homelessness services and food trucks. There needs to be more women's only places and gender diverse only places that are safe places. And the whole system does mental health and suicide prevention extremely poorly. Improving that response could lead to a lot of lives being saved. And it could also improve the perpetrators' mental health and prevent murders as well. The system wastes a lot of money on temporary places in hotels, and if they gave the money where appropriate to Airbnbs, the money would go a lot further. In the hotel system, we move around like gypsies with no guarantee we will have a roof over our heads on any given night, or have to move the next week or week by week. And I have to live outdoors and sleep rough in between temporary housing stays, and because the housing's not safe or suitable for my disabilities or has mould, I have to live outdoors when they're funded anyway. So I'm allergic to mould, and I would like to see, I've had more falls with my disabilities and more permanent injuries because of being placed in inaccessible housing. In my experience and the experience of others I support, the housing system's making us all sicker. And I got onto the NDIS really late, through the court battles. I'm going through them now, and you know, it takes years of it being dragged out with case management, directions, hearings with the AAT, and no lawyer to represent you, while the NDAS have all their lawyers. And the last point I just want to quickly finish on is that there's great importance of learning from the people you work with and not seeing us for our experiences, but learning about who we are. So you can share some of yourself as a worker to build trust and relationship with those you work with. For example, beyond my experience and beyond my disabilities, I'm a disability advocate. I'm a writer, a swimmer, a dancer, an auntie, an artist, a musician, a community-based researcher, a community artist, and a carer to my family with disabilities. I have developed some lived experience, disability housing, mainstream housing resources that I can have to share with you. You're welcome to contact me by email homelesswomenmelbourne@gmail.com. That's homelesswomenmelbourne@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Yara, that was amazing. I just wanted to respond to one point you made there about gender diverse refuges, and that in the Western region with the refuge accommodation that we provide, that it does not discriminate against gender in terms of when we assess who enters into that accommodation type. Gender would not be something that would hold it back.
Is that Macaulay?
No, this is Berry Street.
Oh, Berry Street, yeah.
So-
No, I'm aware that there needs to be one just for gender diverse people, run by gender diverse people. It's what I would really like to see for the future, yeah. Because they get treated really badly by a lot of women too, yeah.
Thanks, all of you. I'm sorry, I think we're not going to have time to go back to you, Human, because I think, am I right? I've got 10 more minutes. I thought it was 2:45. Well, we do have time to go back, so that's fantastic. Because what I wanted to ask you, Human, is about that trajectory of support. So you were talking about all of the different, because you didn't know how to navigate the services and all of the different elements of support that you were receiving. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect a bit more on that, what kind of support you really needed to make that transition. Clearly you got back into work and sustained housing. So what was the supports that were really important in that journey to get those outcomes? Yes.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you so much for sharing those experience and your recommendations. Amazing. So looking back, I suppose there are multiple, it's very complex, like the needs are. So as I said earlier on, just because we have a place to call home, it doesn't necessarily mean that all is good now. So to get to that step, afterwards, there will be probably needing support for behavioral issues, myself as well as the children, financial issues, to talk about the choice of options, same here, do I put the $10 in the petrol to get the kids to school, or do I put that $5 to their little excursion, or make them normal, oh, my friends got this LCM bars in their play lunch, stuff like that. So, but we can't afford, I try to live as normal as possible for them. So the financial help, because it's kind of like you're caught in this forever vicious cycles, because you got your single parenting payment, you got your family benefit, AB, I'm not sure what is still going on, but when you go and try to do work and get some extra, that will decrease, and it never it's a struggle. It is leaving the abusive relationship is one thing, but then how do you survive in this big wide world that that you're leaving your comfort zone, so to speak? But I think if I look back, at least in that zone, I can sort of anticipate something's gonna happen. I could either be psychological, physical, sexual abuse, or whatever. But at least I know that would be a quiet time that I could get back. But now it's relentless, you have to figure it out, all the things, and then not just myself, and also the children, and the schooling, and then the social disconnection. Because
even it was his friends, it was like, you know, my son was going to kindy, so there's a little friends groups there as well for the moms, but we can't go back to there, so that is a loss of like the connection, and having family overseas or more friends, it is really difficult to sometimes my down moment, I actually scream out to this, you know, like, how much more suffering do I need, you know, just give me a break and then I can go on, you know, so that is that, like the try to get back to that, like connecting with others, like reconnecting with the society, you know, with what is normal, and then the employment, because like being a single mom, you know, have to look after the kids, you know, the childcare is expensive, or even though it's subsidized, you have to always weigh up, is it worth to take up that extra hours, or who's going to look after them, and then like as my kids grow older, then it's like the before and after school care, you know, there's also like when they are on holiday program, I'm working in a holiday program for other children, you know, so that is like a very, so that precarious employment, and obviously like being a stay-at-home mom for so long, my skills is no longer relevant, and you know, I have to brush up my English, that's why I put myself through to the education system. I said, I'm not going to be a statistic, you know, end up in this, like, in, you know, oh, she's homeless, or she's like a single mom and not going anywhere, it's a budget, or, you know, that sort of dull budget. And the juggling of all that, I think it would be great to see more support, as I earlier on Lincoln, like not just like sort of financial, emotional, and then all wrap around. And in terms of like the stable accommodation, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a place that you call home that is safe, secure, and you can do things to it, you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, that's going to be taken away from you. And so I just cannot stress enough of that. So if there's any, like, the social housing is very, I know that there's a forever demand, like low social, like the housing stock. Maybe there's other innovative things, like, for instance, like for me, I saved up some money, and then the divorce came, I got some money, can put it in a deposit. But unfortunately, the bank said to me, you're a single mom with 2 children, you don't have like employment, you know, we're not going to lend money to you. So I actually had to get my brother from overseas to be a joint owner for property to get through that loophole, even though I was the one who paid the rent and he's overseas. So there's the discrimination of like seeing a woman who with 2 children and no record, and you know that is a very, and then in terms of the rental, I suppose that's why I want to get into the rental market, looking at your statistics, you know, before, holy, if I'm still there, I would be like one of the, like, I could be end up in the street, seriously, if I haven't got, like my brother haven't helped me. I don't think I could afford that rent. I don't think I could afford, like, have food on the table as well as education for my children, you know. I struggle, like, even like paying like those, like, working bees, or, you know, like, you know, I have to go there to do the working because like $20, you know. So that is a whole heaps of things. So having a stable accommodation, it is like the starting point to, especially when women escaping, like safe was never safe, and now you can do something about it. So.
Thank you. Sorry.